Officer Martinez knelt beside the wooden bench where 10-year-old Danny sat trembling. His small hands clutched tightly in his lap. The boy's eyes darted between the uniformed man and the fresh red graffiti sprawled across the park pavilion wall behind them. "Did you do this, son?" Martinez asked gently, his voice carrying the weight of authority that made Danny's stuttering worse. No, sir. I didn't." Danny's words came out in broken fragments, each syllable a struggle that made his face flush red with effort. His mother, Sarah, stood 10 feet away, her own hands shaking as she watched her son being questioned about something she knew he could never have done. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Danny had finished his speech therapy session at the community center, his backpack heavy with homework and the special communication device his therapist had given him to practice with. "Remember, Danny, take your time with each word, Mrs. Chen had said, her encouraging smile the last thing he'd seen before heading to Riverside Park for his daily routine. For 3 years, Danny had claimed the same corner of the park every afternoon. The old oak tree provided shade, and the bench beneath it gave him a perfect view of the pond where ducks gathered. Other children ran and played around him, but Danny preferred his quiet observations. He would sit with his sketchbook, drawing the birds and practicing his speech exercises aloud, each word carefully formed despite the cerebral palsy that made speaking feel like climbing a mountain. Sarah worked the evening shift at the hospital, which meant Danny spent his afternoons at the park under the watchful eye of Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment complex nearby. The arrangement had worked perfectly until Karen Whitmore moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago. From the beginning, Karen had made it clear that she disapproved of Danny's presence in her park. "That boy doesn't belong here," Karen had told Mrs. Rodriguez just last week, her voice sharp with disdain. "He makes weird noises, and he scares the other children. This is supposed to be a family park." Mrs. Rodriguez had defended Danny firmly, but Karen's complaints had grown more frequent and more aggressive. The call had come in at 2:47 p.m. Karen's voice was breathless with manufactured urgency as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "I need police at Riverside Park immediately. There's a boy here vandalizing property. He's spray-painted profanity all over the pavilion wall. I'm watching him right now." She paused for effect, her tone shifting to one of concerned citizenship. "I think he might be mentally disturbed. He keeps making strange sounds and gestures." Officer Martinez arrived within minutes, his patrol car's presence drawing curious stares from other park visitors. Karen approached him immediately, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at Danny, who sat obliviously sketching a family of mallards. "That's him, officer. I saw him with the spray paint can. He was making those weird noises while he did it, like he was enjoying himself." The graffiti was impossible to miss. Bright red letters spelled out crude words across the pristine white wall of the pavilion, the paint still wet enough to reflect the afternoon sunlight. Danny's positioning on the bench gave him a clear view of the wall, and, to an untrained eye, it might have seemed plausible that he was responsible. But Martinez had worked with special needs children before, and something about Karen's story didn't sit right. "Ma'am, I need you to step back while I talk to the boy," Martinez said firmly. Karen's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she complied, though she remained close enough to hear every word. The officer approached Danny slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Hi there, son. I'm Officer Martinez. Can you tell me your name?" Danny looked up from his sketchbook, his pencil still clutched in his right hand. Danny Morrison." The words came out carefully, each syllable requiring visible effort. His speech pattern was distinctive, marked by the repetitive sounds and pauses that characterized his condition. But there was no malice in his expression, only confusion about why a police officer was talking to him. Danny, do you know why I'm here? Martinez asked, his tone gentle but professional. The boy's eyes darted toward the wall behind him, taking in the graffiti for the first time. His face immediately crumpled with distress, and he began shaking his head vigorously. Bad words on the wall. I don't like bad words. Karen stepped forward again, her voice rising with false righteousness. Don't let him fool you. Officer, I saw him do it. He's probably been coached on what to say if he got caught. She crossed her arms, her designer jacket pristine despite the warm afternoon. These people always have excuses. The phrase, "these people," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Martinez felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Ma'am, I need you to give me some space to conduct this interview. He turned back to Danny, whose distress was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Danny, have you been sitting on this bench long? Since lunchtime. I come here every day after speech therapy. Danny's words were clearer now, as if the routine question had calmed him slightly. I draw the ducks. They're my friends. He held up his sketchbook, revealing detailed pencil drawings of waterfowl, each one carefully labeled with shaky handwriting. Martinez examined the drawings with genuine interest. The detail was remarkable, showing a level of patience and observation that contradicted Karen's characterization of Danny as a destructive vandal. These are really good. Danny, how long does it take you to draw one? A long time. I have to go slow. Danny's pride in his artwork was evident, and Martinez noticed that the boy's hands, while they trembled slightly, showed no signs of paint stains. In fact, Danny's clothing was spotless, his backpack neatly organized, and his entire appearance suggested someone who was careful and methodical, not reckless. By this time, Sarah had arrived, having received an urgent call from Mrs. Rodriguez. She ran across the park, her nurse's uniform still damp with sweat from her hurried drive from the hospital. Danny, are you okay, sweetheart? She knelt beside her son, immediately checking him for signs of distress that only a mother would recognize. Ma'am, are you this boy's guardian? Martinez asked, standing to address Sarah directly. The relief on her face was palpable as she gathered Danny into her arms, but her eyes were sharp with maternal protectiveness. I'm his mother, Sarah Morrison. What's this about? Karen immediately launched into her accusations again, her voice gaining volume and urgency. Your son vandalized public property. I witnessed him spray painting obscenities on the pavilion wall. He needs to be held accountable for his actions. She gestured dramatically at the graffiti, her performance designed to convince not just the officer, but the growing crowd of onlookers. Sarah's face flushed with anger, but she kept her voice steady. Danny has cerebral palsy and speech apraxia. He's never been violent or destructive in his life. He comes to this park every day to practice his speech exercises and draw. He wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone vandalize property. All parents make excuses for their children, Karen shot back, her tone dismissive. But I know what I saw. Maybe if you supervised him better, this wouldn't have happened. The accusation struck Sarah like a physical blow, and Martinez could see the pain in her eyes as she absorbed Karen's words. The officer was growing increasingly uncomfortable with Karen's aggressive demeanor. But he had to follow protocol. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask Danny some questions about the graffiti. Can you help him understand what's happening? His tone was respectful, but the implication was clear. Danny was still a suspect. Sarah knelt beside her son, her hands gentle on his shoulders. Danny, the police officer needs to know about the bad words on the wall. Can you tell him what you know? Her voice was calm, but Martinez could see the fear in her eyes. She knew how the system often treated people with disabilities, and she was terrified for her son. Danny looked at the graffiti again, his expression showing genuine distress. I don't like bad words. They make me feel sick in my stomach. He turned to Martinez, his eyes wide with confusion. Why would someone write bad words? It makes the park ugly. The sincerity in Danny's voice was unmistakable, and Martinez found himself believing the boy's innocence. But Karen wasn't finished. He's lying. I saw him do it with my own eyes. He had a red spray paint can, and he was making those weird noises while he painted. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Maybe he doesn't remember because of his condition. The suggestion that Danny's disability made him both untrustworthy and unaccountable was too much for Sarah to bear. How dare you suggest that my son's disability makes him a criminal? Danny has never lied to me about anything. He's incapable of the kind of deception you're describing. Martinez decided to take a different approach. Danny, can you show me everything you've done since you got to the park today? The boy nodded eagerly, grateful for a chance to demonstrate his innocence. He walked the officer through his routine, arriving at 1:30, setting up his art supplies, practicing his speech exercises, and beginning his daily sketch. I always sit here first, Danny explained, pointing to the bench. Then I count the ducks. Today, there were 7 mallards and 3 wood ducks. He opened his sketchbook to show his work, the detailed drawings time-stamped in his careful handwriting. I was drawing the mama duck with her babies when you came. The timeline didn't add up. According to Karen's call, she had witnessed Danny vandalizing the wall at 2:47 p.m., but his drawings showed consistent, uninterrupted work that would have taken at least an hour to complete. Martinez examined the sketches more closely, noting the progression of detail and the careful attention to shading that suggested focused, continuous effort. Mrs. Morrison, does Danny always bring these same art supplies? Martinez asked, examining the boy's backpack. Sarah nodded, listing the contents: colored pencils, erasers, a small ruler, and several sketchbooks. Notably absent was anything that could have been used for spray painting. Karen's impatience was growing. He could have thrown the spray paint can away after he used it. Have you checked the trash bins? She pointed toward the waste receptacles near the pavilion, her suggestion seeming reasonable on the surface. Martinez decided to investigate. He walked to the nearest trash bin and began examining its contents while Karen watched with satisfaction. But instead of finding evidence against Danny, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. At the bottom of the bin, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a can of red spray paint, its nozzle still wet with fresh paint. Well, there's your evidence, Karen said triumphantly, but Martinez was studying the can more carefully. The fingerprints on the metal surface were clear and fresh, and they were far too large to belong to a 10-year-old boy. Moreover, the way the can had been wrapped and disposed of suggested deliberate concealment, not the panicked actions of a child caught in the act. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you some questions, Martinez said, his tone shifting to one of professional suspicion. Karen's confident expression faltered slightly. I've already told you everything I know. I witnessed the vandalism and reported it like any good citizen would. When exactly did you see Danny spray painting the wall? Martinez asked, pulling out his notebook. Karen's eyes darted nervously as she repeated her story. But this time, Martinez was listening for inconsistencies. I was walking my dog around 2:45 when I heard those strange noises. I looked over and saw him with the spray paint can. Where is your dog now? Martinez asked. The question seemed to catch Karen off guard. I took him home after I called 911. He was getting agitated by all the commotion. Her answer was plausible, but Martinez noticed that she hadn't mentioned the dog in her original statement. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing from a distance, finally approached the group. "Officer, I watch Danny every day. He's been sitting on that bench since 1:30, just like he said. I would have noticed if he got up to vandalize anything." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had been a witness to countless afternoons in the park. Karen's face reddened with anger. She's just trying to protect him because she's supposed to be watching him. This is all about covering up her negligence. But Mrs. Rodriguez stood her ground, her elderly frame straightening with dignity. "I've been coming to this park for 15 years. I know the difference between a child playing and a child causing trouble." More witnesses began to come forward. A jogger who had passed by multiple times confirmed seeing Danny in the same spot for over an hour. A mother with 2 young children remembered him waving at her kids from the bench. Each testimony painted a picture of a boy who had remained stationary and peaceful throughout the afternoon. Martinez decided to take a closer look at the graffiti itself. The letters were spray-painted at a height that would have required Danny to stand on something to reach. But there was no evidence of any platform or step stool near the wall. Moreover, the angle and pressure of the spray pattern suggested someone taller and with steadier hands than a child with cerebral palsy could manage. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you walk me through exactly what you saw?" Martinez asked again, this time more insistently. Karen's story began to shift slightly. "Well, I didn't see him actually spray painting, but I heard those noises he makes. And when I looked over, there was the fresh graffiti, and he was sitting right there with his back to the wall." The admission was crucial. Karen had not actually witnessed the vandalism, only assumed Danny was responsible because of his proximity to the crime scene. Martinez felt a growing certainty that something was very wrong with this entire situation, but he needed more evidence before he could act. That evidence came from an unexpected source. Mike Chen, the park's maintenance supervisor, had been watching the commotion from his office window. "Officer, I think you need to see something," he called out, approaching the group with a tablet in his hands. "We have security cameras installed around the park. I pulled up the footage from this afternoon." Karen's face went pale. "Security cameras? I didn't know there were cameras." Her voice was barely a whisper, and Martinez noticed that her hands were beginning to shake. "Well, that's perfect. The cameras will show exactly what happened." Mike set up the tablet so everyone could see the screen. The footage was clear and damning. At 2:35 p.m., the camera showed Danny sitting peacefully on his bench, his head down as he worked on his drawing. At 2:42 p.m., a figure in a designer jacket approached the pavilion wall, looked around nervously, and then quickly spray-painted the graffiti before hurrying away. The figure was unmistakably Karen Whitmore. The camera captured her face clearly as she checked to make sure no one was watching, then documented her entire vandalism process. After finishing the graffiti, she had walked to the trash bin and disposed of the evidence, then pulled out her phone to call 911. The silence that followed was deafening. Danny, who had been following the conversation with growing confusion, suddenly understood what was happening. "She wrote the bad words," he asked, his voice small and hurt. "Why would she write bad words and say I did it?" Martinez turned to Karen, his expression stern and unforgiving. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for filing a false police report, vandalism of public property, and attempting to frame a minor." He began reading her rights as she stood frozen, her carefully constructed lie crumbling around her. "This is ridiculous." Karen finally exploded. "You're taking the word of a retarded kid over a tax-paying citizen. I was trying to protect this community from undesirable elements." Her mask of respectability had completely slipped, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking with controlled rage. "My son is not retarded, and he's not undesirable. He's a sweet, innocent child who comes to this park to find peace and practice his speech." You targeted him because you thought no one would believe him." The crowd that had gathered was murmuring angrily, and Martinez could see that Karen's words had disgusted everyone present. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." He guided her toward his patrol car, while she continued to protest her innocence. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to help. That boy doesn't belong here." Karen's voice grew shriller as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You'll all regret this when your property values drop because of these people." As Karen was driven away, the park fell into a different kind of quiet. Danny sat on his bench, still holding his sketchbook, trying to process what had just happened. "Mom, why did the lady say I wrote bad words?" he asked, his voice breaking with confusion and hurt. Sarah knelt beside her son, pulling him into a fierce hug. "Some people have sick hearts, Danny. They do mean things because they're afraid of what they don't understand. But you didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect just the way you are." Mrs. Rodriguez approached them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Danny, mijo, I'm so sorry this happened to you. But I want you to know that everyone here believes in you. You're part of this community, and you belong here just as much as anyone else." Other park visitors began to approach, offering words of support and apologies for what Danny had endured. The jogger who had testified on his behalf knelt down to admire his drawings. The mother with young children promised to bring them by tomorrow to see his artwork. What had started as a day of false accusations was transforming into a moment of community solidarity. Mike Chen approached Sarah with a proposition. "Mrs. Morrison, I'd like to create a display case near the pavilion where Danny can showcase his artwork. The park board has been looking for ways to celebrate local talent, and I think your son's drawings would be perfect." Danny's eyes lit up with joy. Really, people would want to see my duck drawings. The idea that his art might bring happiness to others seemed to wash away some of the pain from the afternoon's events. I could draw different birds for each season. Officer Martinez returned after processing Karen's arrest, his expression serious but kind. "Mrs. Morrison, I want to personally apologize for what your son went through today. No child should have to experience being falsely accused, especially not someone as innocent as Danny." "What will happen to the woman who did this?" Sarah asked, her protective instincts still on high alert. Martinez explained that Karen would face multiple charges, including filing a false police report, vandalism, and potentially hate crime enhancements depending on the prosecutor's review. "The security footage is clear evidence," Martinez continued. "Her attempt to frame Danny shows premeditation, which makes the charges more serious. She'll likely face community service, fines, and possibly jail time." He paused, looking at Danny with respect. "Your son's honesty and the community's support made all the difference." As the sun began to set, the park slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Danny had finished his drawing for the day, a detailed sketch of a great blue heron he had spotted during the commotion. "Look, Mom, I drew the big bird." He was watching everything that happened. Sarah examined the drawing with wonder. Despite the trauma of the afternoon, Danny had managed to capture the heron's elegant posture and watchful expression with remarkable skill. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You have such a gift." The next morning brought news that would change everything. The local newspaper had picked up the story, and the headline read, "Disabled boy falsely accused of vandalism. Community rallies in support." The article detailed Karen's arrest and highlighted Danny's artistic talents, with a full-color photograph of his duck drawings. By noon, the park was flooded with visitors wanting to meet Danny and see his artwork. Local television stations sent crews to interview him, and his speech therapist, Mrs. Chen, was amazed at how clearly he spoke when discussing his passion for drawing. "Art gives me words when speaking is hard," he explained to a reporter. The mayor's office called to invite Danny to receive a commendation for his grace under pressure and his artistic contributions to the community. The school district's art coordinator visited to discuss enrolling him in advanced art classes. Most importantly, dozens of families with special needs. Children reached out to Sarah, sharing their own stories and forming a support network. Karen's trial took place 6 weeks later. The evidence was overwhelming, and she ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges. During sentencing, the judge was particularly harsh in his criticism of her actions. "Mrs. Whitmore, you targeted a vulnerable child and attempted to exploit his disability for your own twisted purposes. Your actions represent the worst kind of discrimination." The sentence included 30 days in jail, community service at a disability advocacy center, substantial fines, and a lifetime ban from all city parks. Additionally, she was ordered to pay for Danny's therapy sessions and make a public apology. "I hope you use this time to reflect on the harm you caused to an innocent child," the judge concluded. Danny's art display was unveiled on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 3 months after the incident. The glass case near the pavilion showcased 20 of his finest drawings, each one accompanied by a description written in his careful handwriting. The opening ceremony drew hundreds of visitors, including many of the people who had supported him during his ordeal. "This is where it all started," Sarah said, standing beside the old oak tree where Danny still sat each afternoon. "Something terrible happened here. But look what grew from it." She gestured toward the crowd of families, children, and community members who had gathered to celebrate her son's resilience. Danny stood before the microphone, his speech clearer than ever as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you for believing in me when someone said I did something bad. I didn't do it. But even if I had, I would have learned to do better. That's what my mom taught me." He paused, looking out at the faces of friends and strangers who had become his champions. "Art helps me say what my mouth can't always say. I hope my drawings make you happy." The applause was thunderous. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the boy she had protected find his voice and his place in the world. Officer Martinez, who had attended the ceremony in his dress uniform, felt a deep satisfaction knowing that justice had been served and that Danny's story had inspired positive change throughout the community. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Danny returned to his bench beneath the oak tree. He opened his sketchbook to a fresh page and began drawing the scene before him. Children playing, families picnicking, and people of all abilities enjoying the park together. At the bottom of the page, he wrote in his careful handwriting, "My park, where everyone belongs." The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. But the warmth of community acceptance surrounded Danny like a protective embrace. He had survived false accusations, public humiliation, and the cruelty of prejudice. But more than that, he had emerged stronger, more confident, and surrounded by a community that had learned to see past disability to the beautiful soul beneath. Sarah watched her son work, marveling at the transformation in both him and their community. The incident with Karen had been traumatic, but it had also revealed the fundamental goodness of most people and the power of truth to triumph over lies. Danny's art had become a bridge between his inner world and the community around him, proving that disability was not inability, and that everyone had something valuable to contribute. As they walked home that evening, Danny's hand secure in his mother's, he looked back at the park one more time. The pavilion wall had been repainted, and his art display glowed softly in the evening light. Tomorrow, he would return to his bench, to his drawing, and to the practice of turning his observations into art. But tonight, he was simply a boy who had faced injustice and emerged victorious, supported by a community that had learned to see him not as different, but as exactly who he was meant to be. The park had returned to its peaceful rhythm, but it was forever changed. Danny's presence had taught everyone that belonging wasn't about fitting into someone else's idea of normal, but about being accepted for who you are. His art continued to grace the display case, a daily reminder that beauty and truth could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that a community's strength was measured not by its uniformity, but by its ability to protect and celebrate its most vulnerable members.